You're watching PowerNation. Today on Carcass, it's time for us to build a new tool for our shop. We'll show you how to fabricate and assemble a running engine stand.
Plus, give you some helpful tips on wiring up your power plant and dialing it in before dropping it into your next project.
Hey guys, welcome to Carcass. Well, today it's all about tech and fabrication, and it doesn't matter if you're a Mopar guy, if you're a GM guy, or even if you're a Ford guy. You know, there's nothing better than hearing your engine fire up for the very first time, so today we're going to fabricate a running engine stand. And all the parts and pieces that you're going to need to pull this off can easily be grafted into your finished project. Well, we went to Summit Racing and we just kind of picked up the basics. We've got stuff like a fuel pump and some spark plug wires. We've got some gauges to watch our vitals. Got to find a way to spin it over, so we got a starter, and we've even got what we need to cool this thing down. Now, how do you go about building something like this? It's pretty simple. You're going to need to build a frame to set your engine into, and that all starts with some steel.
And around our shop, we've got plenty of steel. Over the years, this stuff has kind of accumulated on our storage rack, and mostly what we deal with is round tube, building roll cages and things like that. But some of this rectangular stuff, we just haven't really had a use for it, so it's sat here for a long time. But now we do have a use for it, and it's a little bit overkill, but it's got nice flat edges. It's easy to fabricate with, and later on, we'll be able to put casters on it to roll our engine cart around.
All right, I moved everything out of the way, so you got a nice, clean working space.
All right, I'll take some measurements and start cutting. The way we determine the measurements for our engine stand is pretty simple. It just needs to be long enough to accommodate a radiator and a gauge panel in front of the engine, and just wide enough to make sure the whole thing is stable. So we're gonna end up at 4.5 by 3 feet. We'll be using 2x4, 120 wall rectangular tubing. It's a little bit overkill, but that's what we had laying around. With the tubes cut, I'll lay them out on the table and put down a few tack welds. And then fully weld it up. I'll grind the welds down on the bottom to accommodate the casters. To make our cart mobile, we're going to be using a set of 4 casters that we got from the local hardware store. We will be welding these on in each corner, but just so we don't have part of the caster just hanging off like this, I made little tabs to go in here, and it's more of an aesthetic thing than anything else. So we'll get these welded on, then we'll weld on the casters. For the casters, I'm not going to weld all the way around each one. Instead, I'm just going to lay down a few stitch welds. All right, so we've got the base all done. We just got to get it on the ground so we can kind of put the engine over it. Use the forklift to do that. Then we can kind of build the mounts and figure out how we're going to attach this all together.
Alrighty. I'll go grab the engine then.
All right, let's get it in over the top.
You just kind of tell me when.
Yeah, we'll just move the bottom around, kind of figure that out.
Okay.
A little more. That's good.
All right, so you have a basic plan on how you're gonna set this up, right?
Yeah, so we'll need to cut a few more tubes. We'll use those to kind of build mounts for the engine, and then we'll have another plate back here to mount the bell housing.
Right, and it's going to be somewhat universal?
Yep, so I'll cut some stuff out on the plasma if you want to cut some more tubes. What about the height? Do you want to go higher, lower?
I'll grab a tape measure and I think we'll just figure it out. Probably
right.
A good working height. This seems decent, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'll grab a tape measure.
Cool. I'll cut out the bell housing plate on the plasma table, as well as our engine stand brackets.
You got your pieces cut?
Yep.
Yeah, I got a bunch of these cut as well, so.
Cool. I think we should start, I'll bolt this plate on here and then we'll just start tacking tubes on, see where our mounts land.
Sounds good.
With the rest of our tubes cut out, we'll finish constructing the engine stand. We almost have the engine mounts made, and one thing that we did to make this whole thing universal is we made these plates here. So on the sides, obviously this one's permanent to the stand itself. This one will bolt on here, and then we did make one to go on the engine mount itself, and then we just have to bridge the gap. So what this does is anytime you have a Ford engine like this, you just take the mounts you already made, put it on. If you have like an LS engine, you'll have to make a brand new pair. But again, once you make it once, you don't have to make another one. That takes care of the engine stand itself. We'll get this thing off here, fully weld it, then we'll move on to mounting the fuel cell, battery, and some gauges.
We've got the framework done. Now it's time to add some space for our fuel and power accessories. All right, guys, well, Jimmy has the engine stand fully welded. We've got a couple more things that we do have to put on here before we fire it up.
And that includes battery, fuel cell, and a radiator, and we will also throw in some gauges just to keep an eye on everything.
And if you want to tackle mounting up the battery, I'll take care of mounting the fuel cell, and then we'll get the radiator and the gauges in. We'll go about 26 on that. A small piece of square tubing will work just fine for the bottom of the fuel cell. Okay, so with that bar on here, that'll give me kind of a little stand for the fuel cell to sit onto. And then what I'm gonna do is weld on a couple of tabs to the tank itself, and that'll give us 2 more attachment points on the side here. So a couple marks, I'll go weld on some tabs.
I've got my little battery tray made up. It's very simple. So I'm just gonna weld this in here. Then I've also got a little support piece just to make sure this thing doesn't flex too much because the battery does weigh quite a bit.
On the side, I'll weld on a couple small mounting tabs. And once it's set back on the engine stand, I'll drill some holes and install some riv nuts. All right, that wraps up the battery and the fuel cell mount. Now we will grab a piece of tubing. We're gonna bend up a big hoop here, and that's gonna mount our radiator. For the framework, we're using 1.5" tubing. All right, let's see how this fits. My measurements were right. We should land perfect, and we are. Go ahead, set up the welder here quick, and we'll tack this in. All right, so we'll also tack in this crossbar. This will start building up the framework for our radiator. I'll add a piece of aluminum to the bottom to make the lower radiator mount, and the same goes for the top. All right, that's got our radiator mounted pretty solid there. And the next thing we're gonna do before we get this thing ready to fire up is we're actually gonna build a little stand with a piece of aluminum on the top, and that way we can put all of our gauges in there and our key switch and the essentials we need to fire this thing up. So we'll take a couple measurements and then I'll go cut some strap. Okay, these stands are for this dash panel here. This is gonna house all of our gauges and whatever we need to make the engine run. It's pretty simple, we'll just drill a bunch of holes in that. But for now, I gotta finish welding this whole thing up.
Coming up, we put the final touches on our engine stand and give you some simple wiring tech to get it running.
Our running engine stand is coming along rather nicely. We've got a bunch of the big parts on it, but up here on the dash we've added a couple more smaller things. We've got stuff like our ignition box, we've got our hand throttle, a bunch of gauges, and we've got our coil pack. But this isn't everything we need to get this thing started. Jimmy's got a couple more hard parts to put on the engine.
And the first thing is our Powermaster starter. With the starter installed, we have a few more things to add on before we can get the engine going. One of them being a starter relay. This is an older Ford style starter, so you do need one of these to command it. They also have an ignition switch, and if we want to get fancy, we have a push button as well. But I'm going to start here with the relay. I think we're going to mount it somewhere on the inside here. So I got to grab a drill a couple holes. After drilling some holes, I'll put in a couple nut inserts for the Duralast Gold starter relay. Duralast offers global coverage for import and domestic applications. Their designs meet or exceed the specifications to ensure fast and easy installation, superior performance, and reliability. To make sure you don't have any problems in the future, Duralast parts are a no-brainer for our engine stand. Next two things, fuel pump and the regulator. For the fuel pump, I'll attach it with the included hardware, and for the pressure regulator, I'll drill 2 holes and use some more nut inserts.
Well, now that Jimmy has some of the parts and pieces on the stand, we're going to move on to some wiring. First place we're going to start is right here with this Duralast ignition switch. That's going to go right up here on the dash. Okay, so this is the first step in our wiring endeavor that we're going to go on here. And you know, there's a lot of those old-timer guys out there that talk about how easy it is to wire up a carbureted engine, or the fact that you only need so many wires to get it to run. And it is pretty simple. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Now, when you're getting ready to wire up your project or something like this, it's a good idea to have a diagram or a schematic. Now, since we're wiring ours from scratch, I went ahead and drew one up. There's 4 major pieces that we're worried about. Obviously, we've got our starter, we've got a battery, we've got our start switch or our key switch. We also have our ignition system. We're going to focus here on our start switch. Off the back of that, you're going to have 4 pins. First pin's going to read battery. Obviously, that's going to go to our battery. Second pin's going to read ignition. Now, that can go directly to your coil, or in our case, it's going to go to our ignition box. You're going to have a start pin on the back. That can go right down to the starter, or again, in our case, it's going to go down to our starter relay. You're also going to have an accessory pin. That's going to control stuff like your lights, your gauges, and your radio. Now, all those old guys were right. It really doesn't take a lot of wires to pull this off. In our case, we have 10 or 12, and where we are going to start is right down here at the battery. I'll start by making connections to the starter relay, then move on to the starter itself. Up next is the ignition switch. And we'll follow that up by wiring the ignition box, the coil, and the crank trigger. All right, that wraps up the bulk of the wiring from here. I've got to wire in the gauges and the tack and stuff. We'll also tackle the fuel system. We'll be one step closer to firing this thing up. Up next, we'll show you how to make sure your engine is right on time.
Jeremy and I took care of a few things and now we are ready to go. The engine power guys, when they build their engines, they deliver them ready to fire up. But we wanted to take this opportunity to show you guys how to put this thing in time, because this engine, from what I hear, is a little bit special.
Yeah, I mean, first off, good job with the stand. This is actually really cool. We've wanted something like this for a while, so we might steal it when you're done. But
Please
yeah,
do.
This one's a little bit different just because it's a crank trigger ignition system. So normally you have a magnetic pickup inside the distributor that tells the ignition box when to fire the coil. In this sense, it's actually a trigger that's on the crankshaft. So it's a little bit more accurate for higher RPM stuff, which is what this engine was designed to do.
Yeah, this particular engine, now this is the distributor, and all it's doing is distributing spark. The pickup is non-functional. You can see it's not plugged in.
Right.
And the plug-in for the MSD goes into the actual trigger on the crank itself. Now there is some phasing that we can show, because you can get this wrong. Even though this doesn't do anything, it has to do it at the right time. So you have to make sure that the spark is going where it's supposed to, when it's supposed to.
Awesome. All right, so you're taking the cap off, you're going to take the spark plug out. So what are you guys trying to accomplish here?
All right, you have to prove the thing is on number one. We base everything off of number one cylinder. That's how you base your firing order. So we have to ensure that it's on number one. Obviously, this is all together, and it would probably run if you just put wires on it. But to show that it actually is on number one, we're going to pull it out, and the distributor rotor rotates counterclockwise on this one.
Okay.
So what we're going to do, we're going to pull this plug, and we're going to rotate the engine until air pushes your finger out. That means both valves are closed and it's on a compression stroke on number one. The majority of times you see someone blow fire out the top of the engine, it's because they have the timing wrong. And typically they'll put it on TDC, but it'll be on overlap, meaning one valve is open and both valves are actually open. One is almost closed and one just opened. So fire gets back up into the induction system. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over. Hear that?
Yep.
Okay, so that's coming up. Now, what I'll do is I'll look down at the balancer, and there'll be timing marks on it. So I'll get the timing marks close to where I want them. So we're coming up on timing marks. See, that's at 40, there's 38. That's about 32 degrees. Okay, so now that that's there.
That's at 32, so.
That's 32. It's like this engine probably has a little bit more, but we're going to point the rotor in the area where we have the terminals position marked on the actual distributor body.
And the body is loose already, so it's really close, a little bit off, so all you have to do is just turn it so that the rotor and the terminal inside the cap are lined dead up.
Got it.
Being it's phasable, you can actually get it one way or the other. It'll still work no matter what. It's being told to fire down here. So it will fire whenever that magnet passes by that non-magnetic pickup. So you can get the rotor phasing off one way or the other,
and it will still run.
And it'll still run, but it'll be so far off. Sometimes it will try to pick which cylinder.
Oh, I see.
So it'll fire on the wrong cycle.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Okay, it's important if you do a lot of Chevys that remember that you're doing a Ford, because it rotates counterclockwise instead of clockwise. And obviously it's important to know the firing order. Small block Fords have two different firing orders depending on what year they are and what engine it is, right? They're still small blocks, but the older 302s, 289s were different. They're the same as the big blocks and things like that. So this particular one is a Windsor, so it is 13726548.
And it's also numbered different, like Fords are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4.
The cylinders are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's very, very confusing if you don't work on a lot of them. But as long as you get everything right, it should fire right up.
Cool. Wires on.
That's the easy part. Now, the all-important hookup from the coil to the top of the distributor.
You guys got water in this?
Yep. Check
Fuel
for
in
fuel
it?
leaks. Yep.
Got good fuel pressure?
Yep. So I think we're all set up.
Okay, well,
You should be ready to
all
go.
that being said, yeah, if everything's plugged in, you do the honors.
Heck
All
yeah.
right. All right, here we go.
Ah,
Go for it.
Excellent.
I'm not a Ford guy, but this is the best sounding engine I think that's in this building.
You're not a Ford guy.
I'm not a Ford guy. We're obviously Chevy guys, but this thing sounds amazing.
Yeah, this thing is awesome.
This is a spicy unit.
It's right?
It's a really nice engine. Heck, I mean, you guys must have done something right because it runs, it doesn't leak.
Right.
Just the fact that the fuel pump fired up, the starter works, and it doesn't make any weird grinding noises.
No.
And a lot of people, when they don't have a dyno or something like that, and they don't want to put it in a vehicle, this is a great option to make sure something runs, doesn't leak.
Yeah.
Make sure all your
Break-in
wiring's,
process,
your break-in
all that,
process,
yeah.
all that. So,
You know, we have a big collection of engines, so now we can put whatever we want on it, which is cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get some heat in it. And just
I
make
want to
sure-
hear it again because this is pretty amazing.
fire back up.
Let's see what happens. Does the throttle work too? Rev it up once. That's going to wrap it up for us today. If you guys like anything you've seen, check us out at PowerNation TV.